I think we all have that one defining moment, the one where you realize your entire life was a lie, meticulously curated by the people who were supposed to love you the most. For me, that moment didn't happen in some movie theater or a dramatic roadside breakdown. It happened silently, coldly, on a granite conference table in downtown Seattle. They used my success as a weapon against me, and they made it official in his last will. If you have ever been the responsible one, the one your family bled dry because they knew you wouldn't say no, hit the like button and let me know where you're watching from right now. I need to know I'm not the only one who had to cut off their own blood to save their soul. You see the title of this video at the lawyer's office? I discovered my parents left me nothing. My brother inherited everything. I know. It sounds like clickbait, but I promise you, the truth is far worse than the headline. If you stick with me, I'm going to show you the paper trail, the bank statements, and the ultimate reason why I chose freedom over family. So please, subscribe right now. If you want to see how an average guy from Spokane, Washington, used his own hard-earned tech money to take down the toxic system his own parents built, you don't want to miss the rest of this story. Hit subscribe because trust me, this is the only time you'll see justice served this cold. My name is Evan Hayes, and I'm 36 years old. I'm the founder of Nexus Tech, a company I built from nothing but caffeine, code, and sheer willpower. I was supposed to be past family drama. I was successful. I was independent. I was the proof that the American dream still exists if you just work hard enough. Yet, here I was, waiting for the attorney to validate my entire childhood. The office belonged to Mr. Sterling, a man whose tailored suit probably cost more than my first car. The room was all glass and muted gray, the kind of sterile environment where life-altering decisions are made without a single genuine human emotion. I'd flown in from Boston, where I'd just closed a crucial deal. But my mind was stuck back in the little split-level house in Spokane. I wasn't there for the money. Honestly, I was there for the principle, for a sign, any sign that my father, Robert Hayes, had finally acknowledged the lifetime of responsibility I carried. I looked across the table at Julian. My younger brother was draped in black velvet, sniffing dramatically, leaning on my mother, Eleanor. Julian, the artist, the dreamer, the perpetual victim of unfulfilled potential. He was my emotional opposite. I saw logistics and code. He saw light and shadows. I built a financial fortress. He built a debt mountain. Sterling cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the silence. He started listing the assets, the house, the 401k, the investment accounts, one by one. They were assigned to Julian. I barely reacted. I'd expected this. I'd braced myself for the expected, the inevitable favoritism. Julian, after all, needed the foundation. Didn't he then? Sterling's voice changed, tinged with that practiced, clinical pity. To Evan Hayes, my eldest son, I leave the pocket watch I inherited from my father. The watch, the one Robert Hayes had promised me when I graduated high school. The physical item wasn't even there. Julian had received it years ago. The sentimental value was simply recorded here, Sterling said, sliding an empty antique case across the table. It was a final, elaborate, paper-documented lie. But the final twist of the knife was Sterling's next sentence. The will also includes a $1,000 bequest to Evan for the purchase of any technical gadget he desires, as a token of appreciation for his self-sufficiency and incredible financial acumen. $1,000. After I had sunk $250,000 of my personal capital into that very property to save it from foreclosure, my father left me a $1,000 pat on the head, a tip for the help. It was the moment I realized my success hadn't earned their respect. It had merely made me an easier target. My lifetime of work was reduced to a generous footnote. The betrayal was no longer subtle. It was formalized in the will. Julian looked down, a guilty flush creeping up his neck. Eleanor started to sniffle, pulling out a handkerchief. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't yell. I didn't even look at the empty watch case. I pulled out my phone. The banking app was already open. With slow, deliberate movements, I canceled every single auto transfer I maintained for the Spokane property taxes, insurance, maintenance fees. I was cutting the cord. I looked directly at Sterling, my eyes cold and steady. Consider my balance zero, Mr. Sterling, both financially and emotionally. I stood, turning to leave. Julian panicked. Evan, wait, Mom needs you. You can't just walk away from the family. I stopped at the door, turning back just enough for Julian to see the dead calm in my eyes. Call Julian, I stated, my voice low and final. He just inherited everything. That's his job now. I walked out, leaving the fake grief and the documented deceit behind. I thought it was over. I thought the $250,000 was just the price of my freedom. I didn't know then that the paper trail was about to reveal a deeper, uglier truth that would redefine the meaning of "at the lawyer's office." I discovered my parents left me nothing. My brother inherited everything and turned my betrayal into a full-blown financial fraud. When I walked out of that lawyer's office, the first feeling wasn't rage. It was a cold, absolute validation. The $1,000 bequest, the empty watch case, it all confirmed what I'd known since I was a kid growing up in Spokane. I was the backup plan, the asset to be leveraged, never the child to be cherished. You have to understand the dynamic in the Hayes house. It wasn't hatred. It was far more insidious. It was conditional love disguised as competence. My brother, Julian, was the artist. From the moment he picked up a crayon, he was fragile, sensitive, and, most importantly to my parents, he needed them. His failures, a forgotten school project, a rejected audition, a failed community college course, were treated like profound tragedies, requiring immediate financial and emotional intervention. Julian was the family project, the high-risk, high-reward investment that kept Robert and Eleanor busy. I, on the other hand, was the logic kid. By age 10, I was dismantling and rebuilding computers. I loved code, the cold, clean logic of binary where 0 meant 0 and 1 meant 1. I thrived on self-sufficiency. And that, in my parents' eyes, was my biggest sin. I remember once in middle school, I won the regional science fair. I spent months on an early network topology model, and I was genuinely proud. I rushed home, clutching the heavy glass trophy and the check. My father, Robert, looked up from his armchair. He nodded once, gave me a thin smile, and said, "That's just Evan being Evan. You're set. Son, you don't need us to worry." He went right back to reading the paper. 20 minutes later, Julian came home, crying because he'd failed to make the lead in the school play. My mother, Eleanor, rushed to him, enveloping him in a hug. "Oh, my sweet boy. They didn't understand your vision. We'll hire a private coach, darling. We'll invest in you." The trophy sat on the kitchen counter, dusty and unacknowledged, for a week. That moment was the blueprint. My achievements were a given, something I was inherently capable of. And therefore, they required no praise, no investment, and certainly no parental energy. Julian's struggles, however, were an emergency. The hidden message was clear. You are strong enough to carry yourself. Julian needs the foundation. This mantra was the financial cornerstone of our lives. When I applied to college, I was told, "You'll get the scholarships. Evan, you're smart. The money we have needs to go toward Julian's expensive art school tuition. He's got a sensitive, creative spirit that needs nurturing." I didn't argue. I took out loans, worked graveyard shifts coding for local startups, and burned the candle at both ends. I built my fortress of independence brick by emotional brick, and every brick was fueled by the cold fact of their neglect. Meanwhile, Julian was whisked away to a prestigious and outrageously priced film academy. I visited him once during my sophomore year. His apartment, paid for entirely by Robert and Eleanor, was spacious, filled with expensive lighting equipment and high-end video gear. He was working on a concept piece that looked like a blurry music video shot in a bathtub. I smelled the expensive coffee and saw the clean, well-stocked fridge, and I felt a gut-wrenching pang of something I refused to name as jealousy. It was resentment, the cold realization that the funds I desperately needed for textbooks and rent were being channeled into my brother's highly subsidized, utterly failed artistic pursuits. When I started Nexus Tech, I was operating on fumes. I remember living above a laundromat in a tiny, overpriced Seattle studio apartment, the smell of bleach and damp clothing permeating my existence. I worked 80-hour weeks, fueled by cheap instant noodles and the kind of single-minded tunnel vision only an abused underdog understands. Every line of code was a personal victory. Every closed contract was proof that I didn't need their approval. Julian, on the other hand, eventually moved back to Spokane, declaring the film industry too shallow and settling into the family basement, turning it into a production studio that required Robert and Eleanor to take out a second mortgage to fund the soundproofing and editing suite. I tried once to bridge the gap. I was proud of Nexus Tech. We had just landed a significant partnership. I drove down to Spokane and laid out my pitch deck, not to ask for money, but simply to show them the empire I was building. My father looked at the sleek presentation, the complex financial projections, the proof of my resilience, and he patted my shoulder, a gesture as warm and deep as an accountant's handshake. Very logical, Evan. Very successful. Now, about Julian's documentary. He trailed off, the implicit hierarchy established instantly. My success was a fact. Julian's potential was the priority. That's the toxic dance we performed for years. I would achieve something monumental. They would casually dismiss it, only to use that achievement as the moral justification for funneling more money into Julian. They didn't see my hard work as admirable. They saw it as a limitless financial resource. They had successfully gaslit me into believing that my strength was merely a currency to be spent on my weaker brother. It built a thick, impenetrable shell around me. I stopped expecting them to see me. I stopped expecting them to care. I focused solely on the cold, hard logic of my own world. In code, there is justice. In finance, there is accountability. In the Hayes house, there was only a perpetual emotional deficit, and I was the one who had unconsciously signed up to be the long-term guarantor. What I didn't grasp then was that my parents' love for Julian was a profound weakness. Not just in him, but in them. They weren't raising a successful artist. They were raising a man entirely dependent on a financial safety net, and when their own net frayed, they knew exactly whose line to pull. They had systematically trained me my entire life to be the hero who would eventually come to their rescue. That deep-seated programming was about to cost me $250,000. I felt the cold, familiar resentment stirring. I should have seen the play coming. It was the same old, tired script. Only this time, the price tag was terrifyingly real. I need you to understand what Nexus Tech was to me. It wasn't just a company. It was my emotional fortress. It was the place where the logic held, where my value wasn't conditional, and where the returns were based purely on effort. By my late 20s, the company was finally gaining traction. We were past the ramen stage. I was hitting those 60, sometimes 70-hour weeks, fueled by a relentless desire to prove that I didn't need the Hayes name or their flawed approval. But while my world in Seattle was built on cold, hard code and contracts, the world back in Spokane was dissolving into soft, expensive drama. Julian, back in the basement studio, wasn't generating income. He was generating debt. He'd bought thousands of dollars worth of esoteric camera lenses, claiming they were essential for his vision. He racked up credit card bills eating at trendy organic cafes, complaining about the lack of authentic artistic community in Spokane. Robert and Eleanor were hemorrhaging money trying to keep his head above water. Every time I visited, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Robert looked older, smaller. Eleanor was perpetually stressed. Her voice always one key higher than normal. I tried to talk to them, tried to offer business advice, the kind of simple, practical wisdom that could save them. Dad, I told Robert one afternoon in the kitchen, Julian needs a job, even part-time. The studio is a massive liability. You have to set boundaries. Robert just shook his head, sighing deeply, the sound heavy with defeat. You don't understand, Evan. His art is his job. If he has to worry about money, his creative spirit will die. We can't let that happen. You wouldn't understand. Your work is so structured. There it was again. My success, my structure, used as a subtle dismissal of my humanity and my advice. I realized then they weren't trying to save Julian. They were trying to save their own parental narrative, the one where they were the heroic benefactors of a struggling genius. The quiet desperation continued for a couple of years. I distanced myself, focusing on landing a major Series A funding round for Nexus Tech. This was everything. This capital would let us scale, hire the top engineers, and finally move out of the tiny, cramped office we were in. I had identified the exact amount we needed for the first 2-year growth phase, $250,000. I had the initial seed money saved up in a private investment account, ready to be deployed. It was my bridge to the big leagues. Then, that November night, the call came. I was in my office, reviewing term sheets, the scent of fresh coffee thick in the air. The phone buzzed. It was Eleanor. I usually let their calls go to voicemail unless it was scheduled, but the time of night and the multiple attempts made me pick up. Hello, Mom. Everything okay? Her voice was instantly recognizable as panic, the genuine, unmanufactured kind reserved for fire and tragedy. Evan. Oh, Evan. Your father. He made a terrible, terrible mistake. A real estate investment in Arizona, a desert lot he thought would turn into a development. It was a scam. Evan. He lost everything. I leaned forward, dropping my pen. How much? Mom, what's the damage? It's not just the money. Evan, he leveraged the house. He took out a massive loan against the Spokane property to fund the deal. The bank is calling the loan now that the deal collapsed. They're demanding a substantial payment, $250,000 within 30 days, or they start foreclosure. We're going to lose the house, Evan. We have nowhere to go. Your father is shattered. Her voice broke, and I could hear Robert breathing heavily in the background. The sheer volume of the number hit me first. $250,000. My bridge. My company's future. But then, the familiar, insidious thought wormed its way in. It's the house. It's their entire life. They're old. They're vulnerable. I can't let them be homeless. I'm the only one who can fix this. My logic center screamed, this is an enormous financial risk. This will delay Nexus Tech for 12 months. But my emotional core, the one programmed since childhood to be the rescuer, the silent hero, overrode it. I couldn't bear the thought of my parents on the street. And selfishly, I thought if I save the house, if I avert this catastrophic loss, they have to finally see my worth. They have to be grateful. I was trading $250,000 for their eternal recognition. I spoke, my voice coming out colder than I intended. I need the bank documentation. Send me the loan papers and the foreclosure timeline. I need to verify everything. The next morning, I was in Marcus Reed's office. I dumped the papers on his desk. Marcus looked at the numbers, then looked at me, his face etched with concern. Evan, this is insane. We can use this money to hire 6 engineers and push Nexus to Series A. Diverting it means you halt your growth for a year. You're sacrificing your future for their past mistakes. I know the risk. Marcus, I said, rubbing the tension from my temples, but I can't live with the guilt. This is my obligation. Robert worked his whole life. He made a mistake. I have the ability to fix it. Just process the transfer. Use my private investment account. Divert the full $250,000 to the mortgage principal. The decision was made. The wire transfer went through. I watched the numbers drain out of my account, the account built by years of sleepless nights. It was a literal transfer of my energy, my youth, and my company's potential. I told my parents it was done. Eleanor cried, thanking me profusely, telling me I was their rock. Robert just nodded, his eyes cloudy. He didn't say much. Just, "You always do the right thing, son. You're strong." And that was the final, devastating compliment. You're strong. The praise was the payment. It was the license for them to continue their behavior. The financial bleed didn't stop there. Even after the massive principal payment, the monthly calls continued, just with a slightly different script. The property taxes went up. The insurance is due. Julian needs help with his business expenses. I set up the auto transfers for another $1,800 a month to cover property upkeep. I tightened Nexus Tech's budget, delaying hiring plans and accepting a year of stalled growth. I carried it all, burying the deep, growing resentment. I convinced myself I was doing the noble thing, the right thing, the strong thing. I was a son protecting his family, but deep down, I knew I was just a walking safety deposit box, perpetually available to be looted in the name of love. I thought I had secured their gratitude and the house's stability. I thought I had built a bridge out of their crisis. I didn't know that my sacrifice was merely the most expensive, elaborate collateral they needed to launch the next stage of their deception. I was paying to protect the inheritance that wasn't mine. That reality, the true cost of that $250,000 was about to hit me like a train. The 6 months following the $250,000 sacrifice were strangely quiet. Robert and Eleanor barely called. They didn't ask about Nexus Tech. They didn't even ask about me. The absence of drama was, ironically, the most painful thing. It proved that once the immediate crisis was averted, once the $250,000 bridge was secure, I wasn't needed. I was just the silent solution to a complicated equation. I poured myself back into work. I had to. The delay in funding forced me to take on more projects, to hustle harder than ever before, just to keep Nexus Tech on its planned trajectory. I told myself their silence was gratitude. I told myself I'd bought them peace, and that was enough. Then, the finality came. Robert Hayes died suddenly, quickly, from a stroke. There was no goodbye, no moment of reconciliation, no final recognition, just gone. And with him went the last possibility of an apology or a late-stage confession. The legacy was sealed, the accounting done. I flew back to Spokane, not mourning the man I had hoped he would be, but mourning the loss of the possibility of what we could have been. The funeral was a blur of polite half-grief, and Julian's overly dramatic weeping. Julian, in his velvet suit, looked like a performance artist delivering his most crucial, subsidized role. The scene shifted quickly back to Mr. Sterling's office in Seattle. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of old paper and new money. I sat apart, still wearing the emotional armor that had been my only inheritance. Mr. Sterling started the formal reading. He went through the assets like a checklist: the house, the investment accounts, the life insurance. Each one, as expected, was designated to Julian. But hearing it read aloud, line by cold, legal line, still felt like taking a beating. And finally, Sterling concluded, adjusting his tie. The remainder of the estate, including the Spokane property, the personal assets, and the proceeds from the liquidation of the 401k, are fully transferred to Julian Hayes. I kept my poker face locked down. Expected, calculated. Move on. Then, The lawyer cleared his throat again, drawing a breath that was too long, too measured. Evan, your father left you 2 items. The first is the aforementioned gold pocket watch. He slid the small, velvet-lined antique case across the table. It landed right in front of me. It was empty. The physical item was already gone. Julian had it tucked away somewhere. Sterling's clinical pity deepened. Julian received the physical item years ago, but the sentimental value is recorded here. I felt a cold laugh bubble up in my chest. The very item my father had promised me, the one symbol of recognition I was supposed to receive, was a lie that Julian had already cashed in. And the second item? I asked, my voice flat, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a crack. Sterling flipped a page. The second item is a $1,000 bequest to be used for the purchase of any technical gadget that Evan desires, as a token of appreciation for his self-sufficiency and incredible financial acumen. I stared at the number, $1,000, not just a meager sum, but a patronizing gesture framed as praise. It was the absolute, final, documented proof of the lie. After I had sacrificed $250,000 of my blood and sweat to save the very asset Julian was now inheriting, my reward was $1,000 for a glorified iPad accessory. It was worse than nothing. It was a public, formalized documentation of my lifetime of neglect. I finally looked at Eleanor. She dabbed at her eyes, whispering, "It's what your father wanted. Evan, he knew you'd understand. You're strong." Julian, across the table, gave me a small, saccharine smile. "It was our duty. Evan, we're family. We have to sacrifice." My vision narrowed. I felt the pressure building behind my eyes, but I refused to let the tears fall. They didn't deserve my weakness. "May I ask a question?" I cut in, my voice low. "The principal on the Spokane property. I transferred a large sum, $250,000 5 years ago to avert a foreclosure. Was that money accounted for in the division of the estate?" Sterling flipped back through the will, his face tightening. "Yes, Mr. Hayes. Your father's will explicitly states that all funds contributed by either son were considered unconditional gifts to the estate, made in the spirit of family unity, and are therefore not subject to repayment or division." The blood ran cold. Unconditional gifts. They had formalized the theft. They hadn't just used my money. They had legally laundered the exploitation. I stood up, pushing my chair back slowly. The sound was deafening. "You know what? Keep the $1,000. Buy Julian a better microphone for his artistic foundation." I walked out, leaving the empty watch case and the $1,000 allowance on the cold granite table. I thought this was the definitive, final betrayal. I thought the worst of the shock was over. I thought the most painful realization was that I was only worth a gadget allowance. But the true, stomach-churning horror was still waiting. I was about to find out that not only had I been robbed, but that the robbery had been used to ensure Julian's inheritance was maximized. The paper trail, I would soon discover, told a story of premeditated financial fraud that made this scene look like a simple misunderstanding. When I walked out of that lawyer's office after the will reading, I didn't go back to Spokane or even home to my Seattle apartment. I went straight to Marcus Reed's office. My CPA wasn't just my accountant. He was the only man who dealt purely in logic and numbers, the only language I could trust. I dumped the stack of papers on his desk, my $250,000 wire transfer receipts, the original mortgage documents, and the damning copy of the will. I didn't mince words. "Marcus, the $1,000 bequest isn't the problem. The problem is that my money was legally declared an unconditional gift used to save an asset that immediately passed to Julian. I need you to tell me exactly where that $250,000 went. I need the truth, even if it confirms they hated me." Marcus, bless his methodical heart, didn't panic. He just put on his reading glasses, pulled up the property records, and started cross-referencing my personal bank statements with the Spokane Homes escrow data. We sat there for 2 hours in silence. The only sound, the tap-tap-tap of his keyboard and the faint hum of the city outside. I just stared at the glass wall, waiting for the executioner's final blow. Then, Marcus stopped. The tapping ceased. He slowly turned his monitor towards me. His face, usually a mask of professional neutrality, was creased with shock. "Evan," he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "They didn't just use your money to save the house. They used it as leverage." He pointed to the screen. My initial $250,000 transfer was confirmed. It hit the mortgage principal, saving the house from foreclosure and making it, temporarily, almost debt-free. But within a single month, Robert and Eleanor had taken out a new, massive home equity line of credit HELOC. They pulled out almost exactly the amount I had just paid in $245,000. They used your money as collateral, Marcus explained, leaning back. They didn't need the house saved for themselves. They needed it stabilized with your cash so they could immediately extract its equity without waiting for the market to appreciate. They turned your sacrifice into a high-interest loan against the property. Your $250K was just the down payment on the fraud. I felt nauseous. It was an elaborate shell game, a calculated, cold-blooded maneuver. My father wasn't just a poor investor. He was a strategic manipulator. And where did that $245,000 go? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I knew the answer, but I needed the logic confirmed. Marcus scrolled down, and there it was, the brutal, elegant simplicity of the deceit. The money flowed through a series of accounts before a massive wire transfer for $120,000 went into an account labeled Julian Hayes Film Production LLC. The rest was used for various urgent repairs and bills. But that $120K was the undeniable proof. My father's frantic call about losing the house. My mother's tears about destitution. The quiet sacrifice that stalled my own company's growth, all of it was an expensive, dramatic performance designed solely to fund Julian's failing film career. The property taxes and urgent roof repairs were just maintenance fees for the scam. I hadn't just been an ATM. I had been a venture capitalist for my brother's bad ideas, an unwilling underwriter for his inability to grow up. The twist. The insurance policy. But the horror reached its absolute peak when Marcus analyzed the life insurance policy, the $300,000 policy left entirely to Julian. Your mother and father updated the beneficiary status 2 months after your initial $250,000 transfer, Marcus stated, pointing to another document. They added a clause: if the house had any outstanding non-HELOC debt at the time of death, the $300,000 payout would be significantly reduced. By paying off the primary mortgage principal, you didn't just stabilize the house, you ensured Julian got the maximum, non-reduced payout on the life insurance. Your $250K was the final, critical piece of collateral needed to secure Julian's entire financial future, including the insurance money and the debt-free house equity. I stared at the screen, the numbers flashing like accusing sirens. I hadn't saved my parents. I had been meticulously used to maximize Julian's inheritance. The whole structure, the house, the HELOC, the will, the insurance policy was a complex financial instrument built on my emotional weakness and my financial strength. The feeling wasn't anger. It was a profound, suffocating sense of being gutted. They hadn't loved Julian more. They had simply leveraged me completely. Marcus leaned forward, his face serious. Evan, this isn't an unconditional gift. This is financial deceit and misrepresentation. We have grounds to sue the estate for recovery, prove willful fraud, and potentially tie up the inheritance for years. The option was tempting. Lawsuits, subpoenas, public vindication. But the thought of dragging Nexus Tech through court filings and public family drama felt exhausting and messy. I looked at the clean lines of Marcus's office, the stark honesty of the data on the screen. The justice I needed wasn't measured in dollars. I could rebuild the $250,000. I couldn't rebuild my wasted emotional energy. I took a deep breath, letting the cold, hard resolution settle in my heart. No, Marcus, we won't sue. Marcus blinked, clearly surprised. Evan, you're walking away from $250,000 you are legally entitled to recover. I'm walking away from the mess. I corrected him, my voice firm. Suing them gives them power over my time and energy for years. My freedom is worth more than a lawsuit, but we are going to make sure they face reality. I need you to document everything. Marcus, every transfer, every date, every piece of evidence of this deceit. I want the paper trail airtight, because when I cut them off, they are going to know exactly why their safety net disappeared. The game is over, and I'm the one who gets to set the final balance. Leaving Marcus Reed's office that day, I didn't feel rage anymore. Rage is hot, messy, and requires energy. What I felt was a cold, absolute clarity. I wasn't angry at the $250,000. I was done being complicit in the lie. I had the truth, the documented, irrefutable paper trail, and that was my weapon. 1 week after the meeting, my phone buzzed. It was Eleanor. The usual message, short and demanding. The property taxes are due next week. Your transfer hasn't come through. Call me immediately. I stared at the text. It was the same old command, the same expectation that their ATM would cough up the cash. I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment of absolute separation. I typed my reply. I didn't mince words, didn't offer an excuse, didn't apologize. I am no longer financially involved. Contact Julian. He is the sole beneficiary and property owner. Consider my balance zero. 30 minutes later, the phone rang. It was Eleanor. Her voice a desperate, high-pitched squeal. Evan, what is this? Your father is barely cold in the ground and you're doing this. You're being cruel. Julian needs the stability of that house to focus on his art. You're ungrateful after everything we sacrificed for you. I cut her off, my voice steady, cold, and utterly devoid of emotion. Everything you sacrificed for me. You used my hard-earned money to leverage a loan, transferred the cash to Julian's failed film project, and formalized the deceit in the final will to maximize his insurance payout. I saw the paper trail. Mom, I know where the $250,000 went. You didn't save the house for yourselves. You saved it so Julian could have a foundation secured by my sweat. I'm done being the security deposit. The sudden silence on the line was the most satisfying sound I'd heard in years. I had finally used the truth as a shield. Eleanor sputtered. He's your brother. You're the successful one, you can handle it. The desperate reliance on the old tired script, and I handled it. I stated, now I'm handling my own life. From now on, I am the only one I'm responsible for. Do not call Nexus Tech. Do not contact me about money, taxes, or Julian's needs. If you cross this boundary, I will cut off all contact. I didn't wait for her next emotional attack. I pressed the end call button, the finality of the click echoing in my quiet Seattle apartment. My hand was shaking, but my heart was calm. I had drawn the line. The backlash was immediate and vicious. Eleanor called my business partner, trying to reach my head of engineering, implying I was having a mental breakdown due to stress and couldn't manage my finances, the ultimate character assassination designed to ruin my reputation in the close-knit tech community. Julian, meanwhile, started dropping passive-aggressive bombs on social media. Some people just can't stand to see others finally achieve their potential. Envy is a poison. He was framing my boundaries as jealousy. It hurt, seeing my own family trying to publicly smear me. But the pain was distant. It was the frantic, predictable lashing out of people who just lost their free funding source. I didn't engage. I just quietly blocked them on all professional platforms. My defense wasn't shouting. It was silence and success. The real consequence was inevitable. Without my regular transfers, The Spokane property immediately fell into arrears. Julian, terrified of actual financial responsibility and unable to generate income, was useless. The bank, seeing the recently drained HELOC, was swift. The fallout. 2 months later, the foreclosure notice was served. The house, the ultimate symbol of their favoritism, and my exploitation was finally out of their control. I didn't call. I didn't visit. I simply allowed the market, the law, and the logic of consequence to take its course. Julian scrambled, eventually forced to sell the house quickly to avoid a public auction. The remaining funds, after covering the HELOC and other debts, left him with barely enough to buy a cheap condo. He was also forced to sell off the expensive production studio equipment, the very items my $120,000 transfer had subsidized at a massive loss. Julian's film venture died a slow, agonizing, unfunded death. He was forced to move into a cheap, shared apartment in Tacoma. The last I heard, he was working as a bartender. For the first time, he was generating income based on labor, not his parents' financial martyrdom. The justice I got wasn't about money. It was about forcing reality on people who lived in a financial fantasy. I had traded the false warmth of a toxic family for the cold, clear peace of solitude and self-respect. The family unit fractured. Yes, but what was left behind was the truth. My freedom had a high price tag, $250,000, and the loss of my father, but standing there, feeling the quiet strength of my resolution, I knew I would pay that price 100 times over. I was no longer the walking security deposit. I was Evan Hayes, and my life was finally, truly my own. In the quiet months that followed the foreclosure, I felt a strange, profound emptiness. It was the feeling you get after an amputation. The pain is gone, but the phantom limb still aches. I had successfully cut the toxic cord, but I still had to heal the deep, emotional wounds that came from realizing your whole life was collateral. I doubled down on Nexus Tech. With the financial distraction gone, the company finally secured the funding it needed, and we started scaling rapidly. But the real change wasn't professional, it was personal. I started therapy. My therapist, Chloe, helped me dismantle the belief system my parents had built, the idea that my strength meant I didn't deserve care. She helped me reframe the $250,000 loss, not as a financial hit, but as the one-time, massive exit fee from a toxic family contract. I finally learned how to be vulnerable, how to say no without feeling the crushing weight of guilt. As I healed internally, my life took on a physical manifestation of that freedom. I sold my small house and bought a modern, sleek penthouse overlooking the entire Seattle skyline. It wasn't just a home. It was a visible, tangible monument to my resilience, built entirely on my own logic, my own code, and my own value. Standing there, looking out over the lights of the city I built my company in, I finally felt the peace I'd been chasing since I was 10 years old. The first sign of true change came in the mail. It was a thick envelope from Spokane. Inside was a lengthy, rambling letter from Eleanor, still full of tears and regret, but still slightly centered on Julian's struggles. I read it, acknowledged the pain, but filed it away. Then, I found Robert's letter. It had been written shortly before he died, after I sent the final $250,000. It was the only honest communication I ever received from him. Evan, the shaky script read, I was wrong. I used your strength as a shield for my own failures and to cover my inability to set limits with Julian. I told myself you didn't need a father's love. You needed a nod of competence. I leveraged your capability to cover my own cowardice. You deserved better than what I left you. I have no defense. I sat with that letter for a long time. It wasn't forgiveness I felt, but validation. He had admitted it. My success was a weapon they wielded. That confession, that clarity, was worth more than the $250,000 I walked away from. It closed the emotional loop. A few months later, I agreed to meet Eleanor and Julian. Not at the old Spokane house which had been sold and repopulated by strangers, but at a neutral coffee shop in Tacoma. They looked older, smaller, diminished by the reality they were finally forced to face. I spoke first, calmly and firmly. I am willing to maintain a relationship with you, but the terms are absolute. Affection is the only currency I accept now. There will be no talk of Julian's needs, no subtle hints about my success, and absolutely no discussion of money or property taxes. If that boundary is crossed, I walk away for good, and this separation becomes permanent. Eleanor wept quietly, but Julian, surprisingly, just nodded. He looked tired, stripped of his perpetual artistic swagger. They accepted the terms, not out of deep understanding, but out of necessity. And Julian began to change. Stripped of the parental safety net, he had to sink or swim. He started taking actual shifts tending bar. He stopped posting cryptic, victimized statuses. One night, I received a short text from him. "You cutting us off was the most important thing anyone has ever done for me. It forced me to actually work. I'm sorry. Evan." I didn't reply with sentiment. I replied with a single, truthful word. Good. He was finally walking on his own. A victim of favoritism who was finally learning self-reliance. Looking back, I realized that the phrase "consider my balance zero" wasn't just about the money I cut off. It was a declaration of self-worth. I inherited nothing, but I gained everything: my peace, my company's potential, and my freedom. I was no longer the walking security deposit. I was Evan Hayes, the man who rebuilt his life on the solid foundation of his own logic, not the toxic fantasies of his parents. If my story resonates with you, if you are the strong one, the responsible one who has been bled dry in the name of family duty, then you know exactly how heavy that feeling of betrayal is. You know the strength it takes to finally say enough. If you want to see more stories about how people took back their power, how they turned betrayal into absolute triumph, and how they built lives that no one could ever take from them, you need to subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next chapter of this journey. Drop a comment below and tell me, what was the moment you finally drew your line? Let me know. Because together, we can turn those toxic burdens into the foundation for a truly free life. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.